Hello and welcome to Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 296. In this episode, professional genealogist Judy Muhn is here to explain what you need to do and what you need to know to be successful in Native American research. Judy specializes in French Canadian, Acadian, Native American, and Michigan research, and she began her work as a professional genealogist in 1993. She's lectured at conferences like the National Genealogical Society and Roots Tech. She's the owner of Lineage Journeys and conducts research for clients, continues to speak to groups, and she's the president of the Oakland County Genealogical Society. She's vice president and social media committee member and blogger for the Michigan Genealogical Council, awards chair for NGS, and many, many more society activities. She's a busy lady. So we're going to get started with our conversation with Judy Muhn. So we're thrilled to have her with us today. We're going to jump into our interview with Judy, and then I'll show you some of the specific resources that she mentions for us in Native American genealogy. Welcome to the show, Judy. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm excited to be here, Lisa. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You are the go-to person on doing our Native American research. You've written a terrific article in Family Tree magazine. And congratulations. I'm sure people have been thrilled to get it because there's always, stories in families and people think, oh, do I have Native American ancestry? I bet you hear that a lot.
I hear it quite a bit. Yep. A lot of people, certainly it's a story in the family, and their ancestors may have lived on or near a reservation or reserve, as it's called in Canada, but they may have been a school teacher or run the trading post or any number of other jobs. So, but I'd like to help them discover that too. Exactly.
Well, let's start at the beginning because, you named your article, the 5 tribes, and you're really talking about the 5 largest tribes, right? So I'd love to have you explain to everybody, who are the 5 tribes and how many total tribes are there, let's say, in the U.S.?
Well, so numbering the tribes is in the multiple, well over 500, right? So there's a process of recognition that happens on the state and the federal level, and it's a very involved and legal process. So recognized on the federal level are 594 tribes. And the great bulk of those are in Alaska, where peoples were very isolated, of course, because of not only the territory, but just the distances. So, but that's the number that are, authorized for help, resources from the federal government. There is another whole group that have been authorized at the state level, but then many of them are working toward the federal certification as well. So that kind of recognition at different levels gets to different benefits. And then, of course, we're talking about 5 particularly large groups that have land masses that, certainly have been knocked down significantly because all the treaties have been violated. So the current land holdings are very much smaller than the tribes originally utilized. But the 5 largest tribes have continued to grow. All the tribes are continuing to grow. But genocide being what it was, all the tribes were pretty devastated. And so, families are growing, and most of our Native families are quite large. My family's 16 kids in my brother's family. My family's kind of small because we are partially European. My dad's family is European, and my mom's family is half European. So hence the way I look. So I look, sort of favor my Scottish ancestors, but my mom's family are Lakota and Métis from Canada, and they met in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So So this is sort of home and not home. North America is clearly home. And so we had people that were on the outside. It was created in Detroit when it first originated. So I had people outside the fort and inside the fort. I had an ancestor that died there, and she's buried in downtown Detroit.
Wow, fascinating. So that really probably just gives you so many different avenues, so many different branches, like we all have.
Right, exactly. Get a few generations back, and you have to learn a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and you do learn, and it's all fascinating. So who make up the 5 largest tribes that you really kind of focused in on? And are they significantly larger tribes than kind of the bulk of the rest of them? Okay.
Pretty dominantly so, and in land holdings as well. So the largest is the Navajo or Diné, and they have the largest land holding of all, and they are unique in that when the federal government removed them, they actually then later let them go back to their original territory. So that is unique among any of the tribes, that they were removed, but then allowed to go back to their original place. So they're the biggest. The Cherokee are the next biggest. They're calling themselves Salagi. The Lakota, my people, many people know them as Sioux, are the next. And we have the second largest landmass, and it's divided among 7 sub-tribal groups, or what we call council fires. And then the 4th largest group is the Ojibwa, some people call Chippewa, which is a linguistic connection to the Anishinaabe, which is a larger group, and they're the dominant group here in Michigan. And then the Choctaw, who are part of those 5 tribes that were force moved to Oklahoma. And the Cherokee was in that group as well.
Right. Wow. Okay. And, and as you talked about them, I know you were giving us a couple of different variations on the names, and that kind of brings me to names, because obviously in genealogy, we deal with different ancestors who have name variations, spelling variations, that they have nicknames. And I imagine this kind of thing occurs also in a Native American research. And it sounds like even within the names of the tribes themselves, tell us a little bit about what to look for and why we see those name variations.
Right. So the names that most people are familiar with, so Navajo, Sioux, Cherokee, all of that, those names were given to the tribes, mostly by either other tribes or the colonial conquerors, military people. And it was based on what they thought they heard, probably. And then certainly as trapper traders and military people and colonists learned enough of the language, they would say, well, what do you call those people? And so then they'd get the name from another tribal group or another, connection. So the names that I referred to when, secondarily, are the names that we refer to ourselves as. So they generally translate in our own languages as something to the effect of the people, or the original ones, or the first ones, or us, our people. Mm-hmm. So genuinely in our language, it's that kind of translation. So as an example, in Lakota, that word means friend or ally. So that's our reference to ourselves. It's our kinship to all of us as a group, but, it means friend or ally. Kola or Koda in the other dialect, or Kota in the third dialect, all means friend. And so Lakota means my or our. So that's where the names come from. And so, certainly the National Park Service has a big map that they sell, and all of the tribal sort of jurisdictions are located on that big map, but they're located on that big map using the words of the colonists, the military people, the other tribes. So there is, so I gave reference to it in the article that there are maps available that are based in the naming of that the tribes use for themselves. So the point genealogically is that when you're looking for records, and certainly using wonderful techniques like using Google and a variety of search engines, you have to switch back and forth between them because the records are derived and named based on a variety of systems, right? So it depends on who's naming them, what they know about the culture, what they know about the record set. So if it's perhaps, a tribal group from the East that are talking about my people, then it's probably going to be logged in under the word Sioux. If it's something that our people created or recordings from our elders or something like that, more likely it's going to be referencing Lakota. So, it's that sort of, we have to keep that in mind. Just like with surnames, we have to use alternate spellings, change out some of the vowels, move things around a little bit. So even with our, our tribal names and our territories and the names of the way our villages were set up and things like that, you have to just use constant layers of name changes and variations just to get at what you're hoping to find.
So you really have to do your homework and know what those possibilities are. And you mentioned, Googling. I was thinking the same thing that I always tell people, if you can't find something, put yourself in the shoes of who might have that and how are they going to talk about it on their website? And it's the same idea, right? We kind of have to put ourselves in the shoes of whoever would be creating the records and publishing the records.
Exactly. And, and even to that point, then creating and publishing the records, then, okay, are they in an archive, a library, some other setting? And how do they index it? What are they using, right? And again, the whole aspect, too, of, just as recently as the early 1900s, my people didn't write down anything. We have a very oral tradition. I can name my ancestors orally going back 16 some generations. We didn't write that stuff down. We taught it to each other. That's part of what many of the tribal peoples do. Like during the winter, you're working on things indoors and sitting around and chatting. And so that's how it's instilled in the kids. And that kind of information might, thankfully, due to recordings that have been done of elders telling stories and talking about their lives and all of that, it might exist somewhere. But who logged it in and what name did they use and how did they archive it and what did they index it with? And so, you have to be really good at sort of listening to how something might have been pronounced and then thinking about how that works. So it's a classic genealogy technique, right? It's just that it's a bigger deal with, doing Indian research because you have to think about a lot more variations for people that didn't speak our language as their first language.
Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, your go-to resource for unlocking the stories of your ancestors. Dive into the newspapers where your family's history unfolds as you search nearly 1 billion pages in seconds. Newspapers.com offers an unparalleled treasure trove of historical newspapers, providing a window into the past. With papers from the 17th century to today, newspapers.com is the largest online newspaper archive. It's a goldmine for anyone seeking to uncover stories from the past. Whether you're a seasoned genealogist or just starting your journey, newspapers.com can make it easy to search for obituaries, birth announcements, and the everyday stories that shaped your family. It's like having a time machine at your fingertips. And here's the best part. Our listeners get an exclusive offer. Visit newspapers.com/genealogygems for a 20% discount on your subscription. That's newspapers.com/genealogygems. Sign up today and embark on a journey of discovery.
You talked about the fact that many different universities or maybe even the WPA or somebody had gone back maybe in the early 20th century and done some interviews. That would be kind of in those other resources that you talked about. But you started off in talking about census, and I got the impression that census records are as primary and critical in Native American research as they are in genealogy in general. Will you tell us a little bit about what we should be looking for in terms of census records?
Well, certainly the census records are important for all of us as genealogists, and they help to place our people in time, right? And in a location, a geography. Again, remembering that you're going to have to work on spelling variations, but there are, particular census records that are available that help to give special schedules. So the 1900 and the 1910 census records have special schedules related to Indians, and will often give the name of the tribal group, again, not our names for ourselves, but the ones that the white settlers gave us. And those records can give us some indication of family relationships, certainly just as other genealogists look at the records. The challenge for us, however, is that because of the way our naming systems have worked and how they've developed through time, some people will be listed in the household and it looks like maybe they aren't even related to each other because they'll have different last names, right? In our tribal culture, some of us don't have the same last name as our direct family members. So that's something to pay attention to on the census record to see, do those people stay together across time? Do they first appear in the 1900 census? They're showing up again together in 1910, 1920. Maybe they're living next door because the family just got big, but they're all sticking together. Similar to, Elizabeth Shown Mills' wonderful fan club, right? But in Native culture, it's also an issue of naming conventions. So, we can go through our life. We're born with one name. We get older, kind of a transitional name that we'll go through, maybe inherited from someone in the family. Then as an adult, we might get another name. We have a ceremonial name. There's a variety of ways that changes over time. So you have to really pay attention to who the family groupings are so you can sort of track people as they're moving together across time. And a lot of our people, thankfully, certainly in the early 1900s anyway, didn't move around that much. They were restricted on reservations. That was part of, unfortunately, the oppression that they went through. But it helps us to keep the families intact and to locate them as groups. So, the census records are very important, and certainly pre-1900, there aren't as many censuses of Native peoples, although they do appear. Some of those records, while handwritten by Indian agents, they were later then typed. So classically, okay, I'm seeing a typed record. That's not original source. What did they make mistakes, right? So finding the original records can help if they still exist. But if it's typed, alert, look for something else. And they might have done spelling variations, or they might have, whoever the Indian agent was on site, write it out a certain way. It was maybe then sent at some point to be typed by a clerk, who then later had to send it to the federal government. So there were regular reports to Congress in the 1800s. And so there are records of compilations of families and relationships back in that time. Notably, our women get left off in some cases because the men were the ones that were interacting with the outsiders, right? So lots of times you'll find the men tallied on some kind of list. I found my male ancestors referenced in Library of Congress records, which is not a usual source that some genealogists would use. But notably, I found one of my ancestors on a report to Congress about the settlement of the various tribal peoples. And he, 4 generations ago, this man went by a single name, Woptica. And, so how do you spell Woptica? And, there's any number of variations on that, but I used the wonderful technique. I think I was at Roots Tech or something and had a conversation with you, and they're like, well, Google it. And I was like, oh my God, that opened a whole new world. So anyway, so I Googled his name spelled in variations, and that's how I found the Library of Congress record. I didn't have to go to the National Archives or doing it. It was online. And I actually even found a photograph of the original first home, which is now a ceremonial location for us, on our land allotment on the Pine Ridge Reservation. So had I not Googled it, yeah, it was there. Maybe eventually I would have found it. But because I Googled his name, boom, up came all this stuff. So, yeah, it's important to use outside of the regular records, but the regular records that we all use as genealogists, census records, birth, marriage, death, all of that, are valuable for, tracking Native peoples to a point. But when you get back pre-1900, things get a little bit shakier because of, A, we weren't members of churches. We have our own deep spirituality, but it wasn't a function of writing down this birth or this marriage or whatever. Everybody in the community knew who they were and knew when they were born and where and all of that, but we didn't keep that as paper. So when the missionaries came in, some of that is a function of attempts to convert people to Christianity, certainly, but then baptizing them, naming them, all of that began happening. So the records vary by tribal group. The Eastern tribes were affected first by the colonization of the East Coast. And then as you move west, then you start seeing that effect too.
Wow. The census records, we think of those are federal records. There are state censuses as well. Is there a chance that we're going to see some of these states are doing a good job of enumerating them and then others are not? Or how would that?
Yeah, it's truly a mixed bag. So yes, there are state records. So I've been in the archives in South Dakota, obviously because my family's there. I've looked into some of the things in Canada. And I've done some research for people, clearly they're thinking that they're Cherokee, or they might be thinking that they're Cheyenne or something like that. The records, the census records can be good, depending on what the reason and purpose that the states or the federal government is doing it, obviously to enumerate, quote, citizens, and citizenship didn't come to Native people until more recently. But there was the aspect of allotment of food and land allotments and things like that. So yes, in some cases they were good, but then what further evolved that is far more valuable are the rolls. So classically, a lot of people refer to the Dawes rolls. There's a whole difference.
We've all heard about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people have heard of the Dawes rolls because, the Cherokee group is a quite large group, and other tribal groups are enumerated in the Dawes rolls, but that's the one that a lot of people know. But there are lots and lots of rolls, and they were done because Congress said, we got to find out who all these people are that we're kind of giving benefits to, allotting land to, all of that. So the rolls document people at a point in time, and then as tribal governments are formed through the federal recognition process, then those tribal governments then determine which of those rolls will deem membership in the tribal group. So you often have to find an ancestor on one of the rolls and declare, show your lineage to that person so that you can claim tribal membership. So some might be as recently as like a 1935 roll. Some maybe are saying, no, it has to be our 1910 roll. Every tribe has a different one, but these rolls were done by an Indian agent, an authority of some kind, a white person, who came into tribal areas and attempted in a variety of ways to either go door to door, street by street, or, around on horseback or whatever, to try and locate people. Well, for very good reason, our people hid. And so there are families that don't appear on the census records, that don't appear on the rolls, because how can you trust a government that, oh, by the way, wrote treaties and then violated them? Other places massacred peoples. Other places, like seeing a federal agent could be immensely terrifying. So some people never appeared on the rolls, and their descendants are hampered in that membership application process to be a tribal member unless they maintain tribal connections, because part of the recognition process does also mean you're actively engaged with the tribe. You're not just seeking to be part of the tribe because you want, some kind of money or something. So the Dawes roles that, there's a number of roles. So every territory had its own roles. There are a number of tribal roles that have multiple tribes on the Dawes being one of the biggest. But that's a way with the census records that you can actually place your people on time. And the roles actually give you more information about whole families. In some of the census records I've found, some of the family members are listed on the census, but not others. But then on the roll, I'll find out about a brother or a daughter or something like that. So using the two together can create a bigger story, can create a whole picture.
One of Family Tree Magazine's best of 2024 is genealogy research software called Goldie May. It can speed up your research, untangle your family tree, and help you stay organized. Do you have 50 tabs open at once? Goldie May can save them. Do you need a research log? Goldie May can keep one for you automatically. Do you pull out paper to figure out your research? Goldie May has visual tools that can help you with that, and there's much more. Goldie May does not replace the genealogy programs that you use, but instead it works with them. What it might replace are the sticky notes on your monitor and papers on your desk, all those places where you keep notes and figure out your research. There's a lot that you can do for free with Goldie May. Download it today and give it a try. Or you can get a discounted subscription at goldiemay.com/genealogygems. That's goldiemay.com/genealogygems.
When would we first start seeing roles popping up? Because it does capture a time frame. You were talking about in the 30s, but how early would they have started to kind of be done?
Mostly the roles were right around the turn of the 20th century. So the late 1800s, early 1900s, going up as recently as the 1940s in some tribes. So the roles were compiled from people who were recognized as tribal members. And, certainly in the case of the federal agents, they lived in some particular geography, whether it was a sort of horse placement on a reservation or within a village that succeeded in, like the Eastern Cherokee succeeded in not being on the Trail of Tears. So they hid out and then clearly created communities of kinship and relationship to survive. So some of these roles were created by tribal groups to help keep track of their members. So the descendants of perhaps people that were on an 1890 roll or a 1910 roll. Well, then maybe more recently, the tribe initiated a roll that then documented their citizens in a more detailed way.
Judy, you really demonstrate the point that genealogists really need to do their homework. They need to understand the types of roles that the records that are available, the reasons that they're made. You mentioned the FAN principle, the friends, associates, and neighbors, seeing the cluster research. Let's kind of go back to the beginning then and pulling all this together. When you hear somebody say, I think I have Native American ancestry, I know when I hear that, I always go resist the temptation to try to jump back and start plowing into 3 generations ago, but keep on your genealogical journey, right? What do you tell people? Are you telling them the same thing? And what are the steps they should take?
Yeah, you really have to educate people, obviously, because they want to jump, right? I want a tribal affiliation. I want to know who my people were, right? I get the motivation, but you have to do the groundwork, right? So again, the key genealogical principles: start with yourself, move backward in time, document everything: birth, marriage, death, location, census, church affiliation, if that's part of your family, go through all of that generation by generation. Do it for yourself, do it for your parents, do it for your grandparents. And then, certainly as you get into the time frames, so the early 1900s and back, then you start looking at what does the geography look like? What is the history that my family is recreating? Like, oh, Uncle Joe had a gin still out in the woods and he got rounded up by blah, 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 Okay, likely, is it? Check that time frame, check where he lived. Was he living in a holler and he could get away with that, right? So, think about what was going on in that geography. Think about what was going on in the history of our country, specifically thinking about the history of what was happening to tribal peoples. And then using that to reach further. So, certainly it helps to be in the state that happened, because a lot of the records aren't digitized, and certainly tribal records, they don't have the money to digitize them. So if you're looking for something tribally derived, you have to go to the source. If you're looking for something in state archives, you probably will have to go there because they too don't have the money to digitize, but God bless them. They're doing more and more and more. And thanks to Family Search and all of the, the various companies that are doing digitization, but there's still a lot of the records that I've found on my own family, I've either gotten from my family directly or I've gotten them in South Dakota. So there's still things out there that will help you, but you have to document yourself going back. And even to the point, let me address the DNA issue. People say, well, it didn't show up in my DNA, but I know I'm Indian. Well, so from, the work that we've all been doing about learning about DNA, there's certainly ways that you could have Indian blood and it just didn't get transmitted because of the randomness of how chromosome mapping and documentation, all of that, the testing process. It's certainly possible. So, if you've got 8 siblings, test them all. Because if you do have native blood and it's within, say, 4 generations, of those 8, somebody's going to maybe come up with that. But if all 8 of them don't, and your story is that it's within 3 or 4 generations, right? They may have lived in proximity. They may have been, at school together. They may have been friends, may have gone to church together. But if they didn't intermarry, it's maybe not coming to you.
Now, Judy, we know that it has to test against a resource. It has to have a pool from which to compare. So would we, though, expect all Native people to have been tested, or even enough of them to be tested to be able to even come up with that kind of a match?
Well, that's a huge issue, right? I mean, my family doesn't have the money for DNA testing. I'm the only one in my family that got tested. My Native family is like, we know our ancestors going back 16, 18 generations. What do I need with DNA? Right. So there is that. And certainly it is a federal kind of perception, like, oh, Big Brother's watching us. So there's a lot of resistance to DNA testing in Indigenous people for a variety of reasons. And admittedly, studying whole population groups and getting them into the database is a critical issue. But things are coming, little bit by little bit, but that doesn't mean you aren't Native if it doesn't show up in your DNA, right?
And even if somebody tested, it doesn't mean that they have documentation that would flag it, that match happens to be Native American. So now you have that Native American connection. If they don't have that documentation, whatever, it may not even kind of raise itself, right?
Exactly. I was doing research for a girlfriend that lives in Colorado, and she had a story about her people being Native, and looking into it, she was in proximity, but they never intermarried. So it didn't come up in her DNA, and it's fairly recent history. I mean, it's her great-grandparents that, she was asking me to look into. Well, they lived in proximity. The one gentleman in her family, a brother of one of her ancestors, was the minister in the local area and interacted a lot with the tribal people. And the one family had a trading post. So in this larger extended family, there were relationships, but no intermarriage.
You mentioned we were talking about the census records too. And when we are going from ourselves and making the documentation, so in a sense, you don't need to look into Native records until you run across somebody that looks like in your documentation. Would we expect to see Indian as a marking in the federal census? Would they have?
Oh, yes. So it'll be an I or an IN in the race column on the census. Yep. Or M in earlier days for mulatto. And certainly I've seen that more in the southern records than I have in the northern records. I've seen mulatto more. And certainly from the standpoint of, tribal peoples, and certainly from the standpoint of communities of color, Native people intermarried with Black. So the mulatto designation registers that as well. And there are a variety of ways that, so certainly the word Indian is pervasive in the federal government records, using the word Indian because it was that mistaken notion that this was India, right? So, and some people, certainly in Canada, that's a word you shouldn't say. That's an offensive word to use to reference Indigenous people. So, but local, the Smithsonian named the beautiful museum that's there the National Museum of the American Indian. And that was chose as a title by Indigenous people that came together to advise the Smithsonian. So there's that whole thing. But the federal government, by and large, the records are labeled as Indian records.
So we will see some kind of an indicator. If we do continue our diligent genealogical research, we're going to run across if there is that connection. Hopefully you might see something in a census record. I imagine that there comes this place where you kind of have to get back into the oral tradition. I'd love to have you share just a couple of ideas on how somebody might be able to tap into that.
Well, certainly, thankfully, our university systems have created some marvelous archives of historic recordings and efforts specifically to document the lifeways of our peoples all over the U.S. In recordings with elders, like asking elders to speak in their native tongue, and then somebody from within the tribe will help with translation. So I'm here in Michigan. Michigan State University has an extensive recording system of not only oral interviews and histories, but music and a variety of other things. So looking within the state of the possible tribal affiliation and looking at what those universities and their archives actually are holding might give a tool like a recording of an elder. Certainly from the standpoint, all of our elders didn't get interviewed, but knowing who some of the other elders were in the same time frame as our ancestors, if we do find an Indigenous ancestor, then finding out who was a contemporary of that person and their family, and then listening to the recordings about how their life was, because it was virtually identical for everyone, whether they were, certainly they lived on reservations, they were forced into that. So everybody had a not so unique experience. They all had the same worries and concerns about getting food and helping their families and all of that. So listening to a contemporary of our ancestor will get a perspective on what it was like socially and culturally for them and what their challenges were. So recordings are in university archives all over the country. And certainly from the standpoint of oral history associations, continue to work to gather that information.
That's a great idea and a great point, that we can really grow closer to our ancestors, understand their experience. And sometimes it's not always just their voice. It could be the voice of, like you said, their contemporaries. And thank goodness that people have worked hard to capture that.
Well, and to hear them actually saying it in their own language. I mean, that's rich in and of itself, because the language, our language doesn't translate word for word into English. We have, in Old Lakota, as an example, we have what we call picture words. And so one word can't easily be translated into the name, for instance. So our family name is Chips, Chipps. Well, the origination of that word is from my ancestor 4 generations ago, Woptaga. Well, how does that sound like chips? Well, Woptaga is a picture word, and the picture is the last part of the buffalo that deteriorates. Well, that's the horn. And so the horn deteriorates into chips. And so from Woptaga, then the next generation, they were called horn chips. The next generation was called chips with 1 P, and our generation is chips with 2 Ps. So that's 4 generations with 4 variations, right, that I got to go looking for.
This has been wonderful. Again, all of you can read this wonderful article about the 5 tribes in the Family Tree magazine. This is November-December 2021 issue. And Judy, is there somewhere where they can read more or learn more about you? Do you have a website?
Yes, I have a website, www.lineagejourneys.com.
Wonderful. Judy, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's wonderful to see you, and I hope we could talk again soon.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I really enjoyed it.
Before I let you go, what I'd like to do is, I'm no expert on Native American research, but I learned an awful lot from Judy, and I wanted to explore a little more closely to show you some of the resources that we mentioned. We covered so many different items in the interview, and we're going to have everything together for you in the show notes over at genealogygems.com.
Today's episode is sponsored by MyHeritage, a global discovery platform enjoyed by 110 million people worldwide. MyHeritage has it all and offers a full-service experience that bridges your past, present, and future. MyHeritage has developed powerful genealogy tools to enrich your family tree and take your research to the next level. Receive automatic matches to family trees of fellow MyHeritage users and historical records, which provide new details that you can add to your tree. Explore 12 billion historical records to uncover fascinating new insights about your ancestors. Add new information to your family tree in one click. Check your tree for inaccuracies, colorize your black and white photos, and connect with relatives around the globe. MyHeritage makes it all possible and puts the discoveries at your fingertips. I've been colorizing some of my own personal family photos, and not only are they beautiful, but in many of the photos, it's actually been revealing more details so I can see more of my family history. Growing your family tree is easier than ever before with MyHeritage. The discoveries are out there and waiting to be made. Visit myheritage.com and try it today. That's myheritage.com.
Now, one of the ones that she mentioned was called Native Land Map, and that's available at native-land.ca. What you can do there is you can enter a location, doesn't matter, any type of location, even an address, and you can also just explore, mouse and click around, look at the map, see relevant territories in a particular location. You can also select or search from a drop-down menu. You can do that for territories, treaties, and languages. And click links. So they'll provide links there for you that will appear with the nation names. And you can click a link to be taken to a page specifically about that nation, language, or treaty. You can also export the maps. So you can make these printable so that you can use them in your projects as well. And you can turn labels on and off to see non-Indigenous borders and towns. They do have a mobile app as well, I discovered as I was exploring the website. So this is definitely worth taking a look. If you head to native-land.ca, up in the upper left-hand corner, you can turn on and off the different topics that you're interested in, the treaties, territories, languages. In the search box, we can just put in a location or an address. You'll notice it's going to pre-populate. So it's looking for these locations and it will zoom you right in. Click on the map And you can see just layers of information about where the different tribes and communities are located. And then over on the left, you can contact them and they'll provide the names, the links, all that stuff. And click any of those, it'll take you over to their website. And on this page, we'll give you links to specific resources and images and that kind of thing. So there's just an amazing amount of information here. And also, it's interesting to see how they are continuing to add to it. So they really encourage you, and they give you a mechanism, a kind of a form you can fill out to provide additional information, corrections, anything that you think would be of interest to folks who are visiting this map. So that's a really very cool free resource. And if you just want to explore, I would encourage you just click the down arrows here. It just gives you all the different options, and you can see what's available. So that's Native Land Map. And something else that we talked about was census records. Of course, really important in all genealogical research, and certainly you will find Native American information in census records over at Ancestry.com, MyHeritage.com, and FamilySearch.org. And I just wanted to kind of highlight for you Family Search because, one, it's a free website, and they have the Family Search Wiki. And I just love, it's kind of my go-to place when I want to really get a sense of what they've got, and not just what they've got, but really then beyond those free resources, what else are they aware of that's out there on the internet? And you can find that at their Family Search Wiki page. I've got a link in the show notes and the downloadable handout for you for this episode over on my website that will take you specifically to this page, the Native American Online Genealogy Records page. Wow, this thing is chock full of all kinds of great links, information, and it really helps to understand what's available and what's not available, right? We don't want to be searching for something that just doesn't exist. So it really kind of breaks it all down for you by the different types of records, also the different communities, and lots of wonderful, wonderful resources here. And it's just a great place to go anytime you feel like you need to really kind of get focused and get your bearings on what's available on any genealogical topic. I think the Family Search Wiki is a great way to go. You can find that at FamilySearch.org. You sign in with a free account, and Wiki is built into the website there. So we'll have a link, as I said, to that in the show notes. Also, when it comes to census records, she mentioned in the article that Native people were largely excluded from the federal census, at least until about 1860. And there's a great article that kind of expands on that over at the National Archives. This is by James P. Collins. It's called Native Americans in the Census, 1860 to 1890. And it's going to help you kind of understand what you're going to be able to find during this time frame. So again, we'll have a link directly. It's a huge website. We've even done an entire episode on how to navigate the National Archives. It's not a genealogy website, right? It has another focus. So sometimes it can be challenging to find that, but we'll have a link for you to this article because I just think it's really helpful to kind of expand on that idea. When you're looking prior to that 1900 and 1910 census that Judy mentioned, that's got Native American people listed in it. You know, you get earlier than that, it gets a little trickier, and we have a wonderful article to kind of guide you through that as well, in addition to Judy's article at Family Tree Magazine. National Archives also has links to more Native American records, and you can download also at this resource page. They even have data collection research sheets. These are blank worksheets that you can download for free so that as you're going through the 1900 and the 1910 census, if you want to use this to kind of collect your information, that's a nice little free resource over at the National Archives. Here you can see that there's links available, and of course it talks about the 1900, 1910. I would probably head over to Family Search really to dig into those particular census records, but the downloads are very helpful. Also, Judy mentioned that the Bureau of Indian Affairs was required to take an annual census for Native American communities. And of course, one of the most famous is the Dawes Rolls. We've heard that term a lot. Some of these are available over at FamilySearch.org, and you can search for it. Now, they have everything kind of compiled together in one collection. It ranges from 1885 to 1940. So you can see here kind of the search user interface. And you can dig into this collection specifically. As I said, it's not totally complete. And I think Judy mentioned that too. Not all the communities are represented by any stretch, but it is one more resource. And also be aware, at least as of right now that I'm aware of, it hasn't been fully indexed. We would certainly expect to see that in the near future, but just know that anytime you're looking at records over at Family Search, they will upload those images to try to get them out to the public as soon as possible, but the indexing comes up behind that. So we've talked about that a lot over at Genealogy Gems, that there are browsable images as well. So when you've kind of explored the search field and you've looked and you haven't found what you're looking for, then you want to really kind of take a step back and look at the whole collection, zero in on the section of the collection that you think your ancestor might show up in, and then browse those images. So it's really just kind of more of a manual search. But be aware of that, because if it's not fully indexed, it's not going to come up in your search results. In the show notes, I have links for you to free Native American genealogy databases. These are many, many of the roles that Judy was talking about. And so if you head over to episode 76 at genealogygems.com, we'll have links for you to just make that a little bit easier to get access to all of these various roles. And, Judy was talking about, we have kind of come across paths a couple times over the years at the various genealogy conferences, Roots Tech. And I remember the conversation we had. She was explaining about what she was looking for one of her ancestors. And I was like, how about Google? Because when we don't find something in various websites that we've kind of targeted and said, this is a website I think is going to have this information, or at least tell me where to get it. Like at the National Archives, sometimes they're just huge websites. They're convoluted. Library of Congress, again, not a genealogy website, but certainly one that we use often. And really, Google can be your best friend in terms of finding the actual particular page within this massive website that focuses on what you're looking for. And that brought her over to the Library of Congress, where she found her ancestor, and that was using the Google strategies I talk about in my book, The Genealogist Google Toolbox, which is available over at my website exclusively. Library of Congress, though, another great resource. And so in the show notes, we'll have links to some of the key pages over there. You're going to find all kinds of wonderful information, the Native American history and culture, and finding pictures. And they have a lot of photographs in their collection, but there's also newspapers, oral histories, so much more to be looking for. And of course, Judy mentioned she's from Michigan, and there's a fantastic collection of resources over at the Michigan State University. So I wanted to mention particularly they have their Native American Studies Research Guide. They'll kind of guide you through what they're doing here, and then you can click on the various types of specific areas within the topic of Native American research that you want to explore over at Michigan State University. And of course, those resources are free as well. So that's just kind of a quick wrap up, looking at some of these really wonderful specific resources that Judy shared with us. And on the show notes page, if you go down to the resources section, that is where you'll find the handout that is downloadable. And of course, that's available to all of our premium members. So we hope that you will join us as a premium member here at Genealogy Gems. Thank you so much to my guest, Judy Muhn, and I hope that you will, again, check out her wonderful article in Family Tree Magazine. This is in the November-December 2021 issue of the magazine. I wanted to call out to you that I don't know if you're aware, but I have a column every single month, every single issue, I should say, in Family Tree Magazine, and it's called Lisa's Picks. Check it out. Last but not least, if you'd like to stay in touch with us, really the very best way to do that, in addition to click and subscribe at YouTube, is just to come to genealogygems.com and join our newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter, absolutely free. You get a free PDF download with that, with some of my favorite tips. That's a unique gift just for our newsletter subscribers. And that's how you find out what's going on around here. The podcast, the shows, and articles. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.